The members of the Shakti caste have long preserved the tribal rituals of their savage ancestors. Here you see a warrior priest, Venerable Master. Unfortunately, the description of the picture has fallen victim to data rot. Originating from the Triangulum galaxy, the Sessin were feared and hated by the humans of the Shakti civilization more than any other alien race. These non-humans were merciless and terrible enemies. Here you see a Sessin warlord, Venerable Master. Chapter 8. The civilization of Ekantata. The human presence on the great Macron island was almost wiped out after the Sessin genocide. Almost, but not entirely. On a planet called Ekantata, the descendants of the former refugees survived as primitive savages. There are only a few pictorial sources of the humans of the Ekantata period. Most depict very muscular and rather stocky individuals with quite large round eyes and often boxy faces. However, some Ekantata humans are also tall and still resemble the ancient devas very much. These tall humans have strikingly pale, almost chalky white skin, while the stockier ones usually have pinkish white or light brown skin. Tight-fitting suits made of colorful segments seem to have been commonly worn garments in the early days of the Ekantata civilization. We know virtually nothing about the culture of these people, at least not regarding the early period. It took them more than 100,000 years to rebuild a simple industrial civilization. After several nation-states and eventually a dominant empire had been established on Ekantata, humans began sending spaceships into the void again. After taking the first steps toward the stars, they encountered a friendly alien race. The strangers called themselves Topsa and resembled upright, walking reptiles. An alliance even developed between humans and the peaceful Topsa, resulting in a jointly administered star empire of small size. Over the next millennia, humans once again spread across the stars of the great Macron island. Slowly at first, but with increasingly improved technology ever faster. When one day the Topsa, weakened by a terrible plague, increasingly lost their power, humans seized the opportunity to completely depose their former allies and conquer their worlds as well. The Topsa were relocated to a series of barren planets where they perished over the following centuries. The rise of the people of Ekantata was rapid, and the number of worlds they colonized continued to grow. One day they encountered the Skill race again, but this time the aliens lost the battle and were terribly decimated by the humans. Their powerful allies, the Sessin from the Triangulum galaxy, never reappeared. Their mighty empire had fallen millennia ago, as the victorious humans later learned. Several names are mentioned in this context in the source text. An unspecified ruler named Upa Pureblood and his successors, the siblings Narta and Kelakti. They made much love and even more war. They were beautiful and without mercy. It is written about the siblings, who ruled together over most of the planets of the Ekantata civilization. Further centuries and millennia passed, and the humans remained strong and vital. However, their empire was since disintegrated into smaller sub-kingdoms. One of them, an empire with the planet Ikra as its center, soon aspired to be the first among the humans on the great Makran island. Over time, the inhabitants of Ikra had developed the most advanced technology and now dreamed of transferring their souls into perfectly constructed artificial bodies in order to achieve immortality. A kind of android cult developed around this vision, which eventually spread to Ekantata and divided society there. A religious leader named Tsima Skriti is mentioned in an ancient text. He was more of a machine and despised the flesh, was said about this man. Later he was executed because of his crimes, which are not described in more detail. The proponents of the idea of one day leaving the biological body behind and their opponents became enemies over time, and the dispute culminated in a bloody civil war that claimed countless lives. In the end, the followers of the android cult lost the battle and their empire was destroyed. For 3 millennia, the civilization of the people of Ekantata still flourished. Luxury and excess had become the norm for generations by this point, and, as always, the curse of decadence and inner decay followed them in the end. Finally, the sources again report the appearance of those mysterious, otherworldly creatures, the opening of portals to hellish worlds, and an invasion from the so-called immaterium with terrible consequences. It is not known what exactly happened, but the realm of the people of Ekantata ceased to exist after these events, and the remnants of humanity scattered aimlessly among the stars. This image is called Virgin of Ecstasy. It was extracted from a barely legible chunk of data. I assume it's a depiction of a ritual mating dance before a wedding. The exact meaning of the image, however, is unclear. Holographic tears may roll down your cheeks, my brothers. You have realized that we cannot control the flesh as the cause of sin, but we can control technology. You are enlightened and your transformation is almost complete. From the Sermons and Writings of Tsima Skrite, Volume 12. Chapter 9. The Rise of the Gene Lords. For a period of over 20,000 years, there are practically no records of human cultures and civilizations. The rise of 2 alien races called Real and Yamit is mentioned. Also mentioned is the destruction of several human-inhabited worlds by a voracious species that absorbed life forms. It is said that these terrible creatures left only empty planets in their wake. Several millennia after this dark period of decay, the first Gene Lords appeared. Sometime between 750,000 and 730,000 years ago, if my calculations are correct, Venerable Master. These mysterious people, for whom genetic modification was sacred, originated from a planet called Hesu. The Gene Lords quickly subjugated a few remaining planets where humans still lived and imposed their relentless rule. Their unstoppable rise lasted for approximately 5,000 years. The Gene Lords altered millions of people, making them stronger, smarter, more resilient and longer living. Finally, they went further than the ancient Devas ever did. New subraces of mutants emerged, often barely resembling the original humans. Images show Gene Lords with 4 legs, 4 arms, grotesque obesity, or very tall ones with thin bodies and spider-like limbs. Over time, the arbitrary alteration of the body seems to have taken on extreme forms in this culture and was apparently practiced with increasing abandon. Some images of Gene Lords are undoubtedly disturbing from today's perspective. However, there were also a few human tribes who completely refused to submit to the genetic modifications of the Gene Lords and thus became the lower caste of their growing empire. These outcasts were called Parana and lived in isolated communities, mostly on remote planets. There appears to have been a strict separation between the upper social class of the Gene Lords and the rest of the population. However, not enough is known about the exact structure of society to obtain a satisfying result. Eventually, the Gene Lords colonized planet after planet. Over time, their leading families became an increasingly attuned collective operating with the same ideas and goals. The technology of the newly ascended humans reached unknown heights under the leadership of the Gene Lords. In the course of their conquest campaigns, the Gene Lords defeated the mighty alien empire of the Real, which finally made them one of the most powerful groups on the great Makran island. After another 5,000 years had passed, the Gene Lords had evolved to such an extent that even the previously superior alien empire of the Yamit could no longer defy them. The majority of humans, with the exception of a few scattered settlers on remote planets, had been so seriously genetically modified that they had very little in common with their ancestors. Meanwhile, the Gene Lords had become so powerful that they could control life on the great Makran island. Their technological wonders filled the void of space, and their planets had become paradisical worlds. Finally, the Gene Lords also discovered the network of warp tunnels. Unlike their ancestors, who had repeatedly attracted otherworldly creatures, the Gene Lords were free of primitive emotions such as anger or passion. Therefore, they could travel within the network relatively unhindered. The power of the Gene Lords increased with each new century, and their knowledge surpassed anything human minds had ever borne witness to. However, as time passed, the rulers of the Star Sea of the great Makran island grew dissatisfied. They attempted to manipulate time in order to erase the catastrophes that had so often destroyed humanity in the past. And the great and exalted gene painter and unerring chronomancer 6 arms, 3 eyes, Parshis Aska Stellar, said that mankind could heal itself by healing its tragic history. So he was the first of the chronomancers who began to change the shape of time. This, Venerable Master, is from an ancient text that has been found in the quantum cloud of the crystal. Unfortunately, many other files reporting on this era have become unreadable, so that once again we only have fragmentary information. By this time, the other races of the great Macron island had already described the Gene Lords as insane. And they were probably right. The attempts to manipulate time ultimately led to severe starquakes and numerous catastrophes that the other races were no longer willing to tolerate. And so they joined forces to fight the megalomaniacal Gene Lords. For millennia, the planet Hesu was the heart of the mighty Gene Lord civilization. The visual depictions of this world leave the viewer in awe, Venerable Master. It is all more tragic that this impressive culture is now merely an echo in time. The grotesque creature in this image is a noble-blooded lady of the Gene Lord civilization. Extra limbs as a result of genetic modification were common at this time. The woman also seems to have artificial eyes. Many Gene Lords wore scant clothing to better showcase the majesty of their form. A young Gene Lord, presumably also a highborn in a garden of mutations. He wears an exoskeleton made of a chitin-like material. This image dates back to the zenith of the Gene Lord civilization. Unfortunately, most of the image description is no longer legible. Chapter 10. The Golden Planet. A long war followed where the Gene Lords triumphed, but which also weakened their empire permanently. In the aftermath, the mental illness of these once powerful manipulators became increasingly apparent. Their empire started to crumble because the leaders of the Gene Lords were hardly interested in everyday matters anymore. Instead, they were now obsessed with the idea of achieving a state of immortal transcendence and perfect collectivism. Several other names of rulers and thinkers appear in this context. A Gene Father called Many Limbs Blind See Xid Golb proclaimed a new era of human evolution. It is highly likely that the title Gene Father meant something like emperor in this epoch. Under the rule of Many Limbs Blind See Xid Golb, the construction of the Golden Planet began, and with it the Gene Lords created an artificial construct of unbelievable size. Inside this artificial world, they built biochambers for millions upon millions of selected inhabitants. The nobles of the Gene Lords eventually left their human bodies, and their souls entered new shells made of a synthetic substance that could take any shape and was controlled by thought. In a final ceremonial act, they moved into the interior of the Golden Planet, where each of them became a part of a giant semi-organic machine. Eventually, they merged into something they called the Transcendent Collective, The Golden Planet was sealed from the outside by their servants and could no longer be opened. Nothing could disturb the process of merging the minds. Ancient sources tell us that the most powerful and influential Gene Lords continued to live within the Golden Planet for centuries, while their neglected empire slowly decayed. The Gene Lords, bowed by the power of machine and mind, created their own realities in which they lived from there on. However, over time, the poison of madness penetrated the spiritual community, ultimately contaminating it beyond repair. Existence within the Golden Planet became more and more torturous for the Gene Lords. What had begun as a magnificent transformation finally turned into a hell of fear, paranoia, and claustrophobia. The Gene Lords panicked and ultimately screamed so loudly that one day their cries were heard by beings beyond reality. These creatures promised them salvation from their self-imposed imprisonment and a transfer of their souls to heavenly realms. The Gene Lords, helpless and desperate like children, accepted the offer which finally sealed their fate. Instead of rescuing the Gene Lords, the beings from beyond our plane used the enormous energy of their tormented souls to blow up the Golden Planet, replacing it with a massive rift in reality through which they could flood the material world. After this catastrophe, records of the Gene Lords became scarce, Venerable Master. Their civilization perished in a drama of fire and blood, and in its place remained little more than cosmic silence for the next 70,000 years. The Golden Planet was arguably the largest structure ever created by human beings. It was intended to become the new center of the universe. This was the plan of the Gene Lords, who believed they could become masters not only of the flesh, but also of space and time. As their virtual world slowly faded away, the Gene Lords inside the Golden Planet realized what they had become. They had not become masters of the universe, but merely helpless creatures forced to exist in despair and agony. Chapter 11. The Escape from the Great Macron Island. Human starfathers from the Milky Way, who called themselves the Thin Whites, reached the Great Macron Island tens of thousands of years after the end of the Gene Lords. Visual depictions show very tall and extremely thin people with long noses, high foreheads, and a skin color of white marble. There are archaeomentors who have proposed the theory that the Thin Whites also descended from the Deva branch of humanity, but this can no longer be proven. In any case, the settlers from the Milky Way encountered the primitive descendants of those humans in the Kulaks cluster who had once turned their backs on the civilization of the Gene Lords and colonized planets themselves. The two human groups quickly joined forces to form a new small star empire consisting of a few solar systems. However, the expansion of the Thin Whites and their allies was very slow. This was mainly due to massive warp anomalies that afflicted the Great Macron Island at that time, making interstellar travel difficult. The small empire of the Thin Whites existed for about 2000 years. With the rise of the powerful alien race of the Block Gar, who had conquered almost the entire Great Makran Island, this nucleus of human civilization finally came to an end. The Block Gar subjugated the Thin Whites and most were enslaved or killed. All that remained was a hidden colony of human settlers on a planet called Modra at the outermost edge of the Great Makran Island. Fearing the Block Gar, the settlers finally decided to leave the galaxy and return to the Milky Way. To do so, they planned to use the network of warp tunnels to cross the void between the galaxies, relying on the knowledge of the Gene Lords. With a few primitive starships that could barely exceed the speed of light, they set out for the nearest warp portal, using the ancient star maps of the Gene Lords. A long and arduous journey began, one that lasted several millennia in real time. When it was over, only a single settler ship had survived. The flight through the Arcan warp tunnel network was nevertheless successful, and the humans actually reached another galaxy. Not the Milky Way, however, but the Andromeda Galaxy. Meanwhile, the Block Gar had already reduced their human slaves to an almost animalistic level through breeding and genetic modification. These unfortunate creatures were the last pitiful remnants of the human race on the Great Makran Island. The star-faring tribe of the Thin Whites came from the Milky Way, and the visitors were revered for their advanced technology by the primitive humans who had survived the fall of the Gene Lord civilization. This is a stone relief depicting 3 Thin Whites. Venerable Master, this being is a Block Gar, probably a tech wizard. This dangerous species was the dominant power on the Great Makran Island at that time. The Block Gar also defeated the Thin Whites and destroyed their civilization. Unfortunately, much information about this period had become illegible. Chapter 12 Andromeda. Meanwhile, the human settlers had found a halfway habitable planet where they settled. They called this world Krina. A silent existence in a completely unknown galaxy followed, during which the technological knowledge of their ancestors was slowly forgotten, bringing with it a life of eternal fear that would last for several thousand years. Pictorial representations show the people of Krina in a variety of forms, from very light-skinned and tall types to even taller and broader types with darker skin color to people with green or blue tones in their skin color. The population of Krina appears to have been very diverse. However, we do not know exactly how this society was structured. Gradually, while the planet was increasingly shaken by internal conflicts and political unrest, a new human civilization developed. One day, however, alien spacefarers arrived from the blackness beyond the sky. They were hostile towards the humans and attempted to colonize their planet. Nonetheless, and contrary to all expectations, the people of Krina managed to defeat the invaders and preserve their freedom. 2 rulers, Likas the Magnificent and the purple-eyed Queen Mother Hertuna, are described in several old texts with a few words. Likas the Magnificent was apparently also the leader of the army of Kryna and the builder of a group of space fortresses around their homeworld. The hostile alien race is not described in detail, and there are no depictions either. This unexpected victory filled the people of Kryna with new self-confidence, and gradually their fear gave way to a desire to explore the vastness of space. Queen Mother Hertina finally gave the order to search for more planets where her beloved children could settle. It is said in an inscription. In the following period, several nearby solar systems were colonized and additional space fortresses were built. There seems to have been no further contact with extraterrestrial races. Thus, over the next millennia, the people of Kryna developed rapidly until they not only mastered space travel, but also reinvented the faster-than-light ambition. Gradually, a new star civilization grew. Fleets of settlers' ships left Kryna, and increasing numbers of the surrounding regions in space were explored. One day, the colonists from the great Makran island discovered a human-like Dropa. After initial fighting, the two species formed an alliance, and because they were so similar, many scholars even believed that they shared a common ancestry. In ancient traditions, the Dropa are described as beautiful people with graceful figures. Unfortunately, I could not find many pictures. They had yellowish white skin and usually red or blue almond-shaped eyes. They were generally described as smaller than the people of Kryna. Their home planet was an ocean world full of islands. Its name has not been recorded. The friendly alliance between the people of Kryna and the Dropa lasted for a long time and led to great prosperity and increasing power for both species. Over the course of several millennia, the nobles of both races merged into a new ruling caste that eventually reigned a joint star empire. Among a list of famous rulers, Space Rider Albares Longarm is described in some detail. Under his rule, the civilization of Kryna experienced a blessed time. Albares was also admired by the non-human races for his wisdom. Despite internal struggles, the people of Kryna continued their steady rise. They encountered the alien race of the Hatta and fought a long, exhausting war against them. But ultimately they emerged victorious and continued to expand their territory. It was a golden age for the colonists from the great Makran island who had once fled to the Andromeda galaxy in complete despair. Another 5 millennia passed, during which the people of Kryna held their own against other alien races and ultimately ruled over an empire of considerable size. An era of prosperity and high spirituality crowned everything the brave settlers had once built with limitless effort. Among the rulers mentioned in the ancient text, Albric the Seer and his enormous building projects are emphasized. The surfaces of many planets turned from great deserts to bright gardens, tells an old legend from this period. The timid colonists had long since become proud and wise conquerors and rulers. By now, the people of Kryna lived in peace with the alien races they knew. So much so that they were even able to join forces with them to prevent an invasion of a voracious species which came out of the void beyond the galaxy. An ancient text about this war closes with the words, "We cheered many days as we danced on the countless corpses of the terrible monsters we had slain. We are not your prey. You will not eat our worlds. We are the sons of Krina, sons of blazing sticks and sharp blades. All hail our brave war master Inkril. All hail our non-human allies." Finally, the future seemed secure. The people within the boundaries of the civilization that had once begun on the planet of Krina no longer had to fear the horrors of the galaxy, nor hunger or deprivation. Andromeda, a completely unknown galaxy full of dangers and wonders, awaited the people who had left the great Makran island in desperation. What a journey! You humans are amazing. Is it not so, venerable master? The Dropa were loyal allies and friends of the humans for a long time. Where this species came from is unclear. Perhaps the Dropa were also descendants of humans who had left the Milky Way long ago. It is unfortunate that so much information on the recovered data crystal could no longer be deciphered. The ancient source texts repeatedly mention beautiful garden worlds. The people of Krina had incredible skills in terraforming planets. In the prime of their civilization, there were many of these paradisical worlds. Chapter 13. The Dying of the Suns. Then, for unknown reason, an incident happened known in folklore as the Dying of the Suns. The sudden death of the suns of inhabited systems caught the people of Krina completely by surprise. Why this happened is unclear, but the fact that it happened is repeatedly emphasized in the ancient records. Over the next centuries, sun after sun died, plunging numerous planets into darkness and death. It is pointless to speculate about the possible cause of this terrible catastrophe. The remaining text fragments from this time contain enough information to support several theories. For example, that hostile aliens or even creatures from other realities destroyed the suns. Unfortunately, we can no longer examine the events in sufficient detail to get a satisfying result. In the end, billions of people fell into panic, which ultimately led to unrest and civil war on the core worlds of the Krina civilization. As more suns went black, a mass exodus began, and thousands of spaceships full of desperate humans fled the empire that was slowly plunging into darkness. The millennia that followed are lost in the mists of time, and virtually no information remained about what happened to the people of Krina and their descendants. There are only a few references to invasions of several alien races that came down upon the dying empire of Krina like scavengers. A female warp seer, driven mad by painful psionic eruptions. The sudden extinction of the suns shook the civilization of Krina to the core. I suspect otherworldly powers as the cause of the catastrophe, Venerable Master. Uprisings and civil war were the result of the dying suns. Billions of people lived in constant fear, which ultimately made them to turn on each other. Later, hostile aliens dealt a fatal blow to the Griner civilization.